real. So it's the number one offender. So what do? Well, about 5 lines up from the bottom is the first direction. And this corresponds to the column on the left on page 65 where it says, I'm resentful at. And the direction is we listed people, institutions, or principles with whom we were angry. And so I'm making a list. I'm going down the page. And later it says we went back through our lives. So I think it's good to start with the present stuff. Your current boss, your current spouse, whoever you found fault with lately. Now, I know what happens here to a lot of us. The ego is smart. The ego is read ahead. The ego knows that amends and things like that are coming. So the ego wants to minimize this stuff. Oh, it doesn't bother me. Anyone you've ever had a conversation with in your head when they're not in the room should go on this list. Anyone that you think or suspect owes you or the universe an amends should go on this list. Anyone you feel smugly superior to, and that makes anyone who's stupid. Put the stupid people down. There's a lot of them. Put them down. Put them down. And I tell the guys I sponsor, listen, this is one place where I'm encouraging you to be petty and childish. Basically because you really are petty and childish. So you might as well just indulge that, get it all on paper so you can just start to dismantle the sickness in you. So allow yourself, put it all down. When in doubt, write it out. Put it all down. It's going to be a long list. It says in the 12 by 12, it's bound to be a long list. So you go down, when I tell guys, take a notebook that opens, so you have 2 whole pages. Down the left-hand side, put a name, skip a couple lines, because you're going to have to, as you come across, you're going to need several spaces for some of these. Put a name, skip about 4 lines, put another name, and just then turn to the next page, do that. When you run out of gas, come back to the top, and then do the second direction. The second direction is we ask ourselves, why? So the first column on the left on 65 is who, for the most part. The second column, the cause, is why. Why were we angry? And if you'll notice in the book, it's just bullet points. You don't want to write a lot here because you're going to indulge your self-justification and your rational. You see, and I think we all have a tendency, especially for deep-seated resentments. I really want to write a lot about this. I want to put this down in paper in such a way that when I read it to my sponsor, he'll go, he did that? I'm going to get the boys together. And we're going to go over there in the middle of the night. And we're going to because you want them to buy your BS, right? So it's just bullet points, just the facts, brief to the point. I know that the facts don't seem to really explain it. I always thought that a lot of this stuff should involve essay answers, but it's really just little bullet points. The third direction, it says, in most cases, it was found that our self-esteem, our pocketbooks, and if you change this from the third person to the first person, you'll see that it's aspects of self. That it was my self-esteem, my pocketbook, my ambitions, my personal relations, including my sex, that had been hurt or threatened, so we were sore and we were burned up. Isn't it odd that every resentment, something was threatened? That there's some fear behind every resentment. So we were burned up. On our grudge list, we set opposite each name our injuries. So we're already talking about looking for things that were hurt, things that were threatened, things that were injured. Was it our self-esteem, our security, our ambitions, which is another way of saying me getting my own way, my little plans and designs, our ambitions, our personal or sex relationships, which had been interfered with? We were usually as definite as this example, and one of the things they add in the third column is pride. Pride's a powerful force in ego-driven people. There was a guy in Vegas who died with over 50 years who used to say, oh yeah, there's 7 deadly sins: pride, lust, and 5 others. And pride is a powerful force. I know that there are people who would rather commit suicide than lose face. They'll die of embarrassment rather than be found out. So we list all those things in column number 3. And we don't have to reinvent the wheel between the linear verbiage and the column. Everyone's mentioned. You just have to put it down. What aspects of self had been hurt, threatened, injured, interfered with, or affected? The 5 words. Well, some of us at times have thought that's as far as we should go. And I've run into members of AA that's all they did was the first 3 columns. Now, if you do the first 3 columns and that's as far as you go, I believe you will get sicker because you've just documented on paper your victimization. You've really just made yourself more depressed and more angry and more crazy. But you have to lay this out in its painful, pathetic, childish reality in order to dismantle the judgment machine that produces this crap. So in other words, what we're really putting down on paper is we're putting our cases we've built against people. We're putting every judgment we've ever made onto paper. And it's almost like we're taking the position of a prosecuting attorney. When you look at it, column on the left, I'm resentful at, would be the perpetrators. These are the people that if there were any justice would owe me an amends. Column number 2, the heinous acts, the bullet points, the things that they did that were wrong. That's why they're down here. Column number 3, the damage that was done. So I'm taking a position of a prosecuting attorney. It's not a new position for us. So what do we do once we get the first 3 columns? Well, it's going to spend, I'm not going to read the whole page 66, but it spends most of 66 trying to sell me something. Trying to sell me a piece of reality that I've denied for years. That this stuff's killing me. It's cutting me off from the sunlight of the Spirit. That these resentments are fatal. They're poison. They make me sick inside. They keep me hostage up in my head, thinking my thoughts of revenge and the scenarios of getting even. They keep me hostage. There is no freedom, there is no joy, and there is no light in my life when I'm consumed with these judgments, when I'm playing God. You cannot experience God and play God at the same time. You can't do it. And so I'm facing this stuff on paper. The book is selling me this just to get me to a point, the second line in the last full paragraph, where it says, if you've bought everything, if you've seen everything that it says on this page, and you get it, you really get how this stuff's eating your lunch, then it says we are prepared to look at it from an entirely different angle. Well, what would that look like? Well, if I'm looking at it as if a prosecuting attorney, then an entirely different angle would be to get up off the prosecutor's bench in the courtroom and walk across and sit down on the defense table and now start pleading their case from their point of view. What did it look like to them? Now, I don't know anything about your personal resentments, but I'll guarantee you one thing. If the person you hate were to enter into a 12-step program and sat down and wrote your name on their resentment list and started talking to their sponsor about what happened between you and them, I bet you that their version of the story is different than your version. Now the ego goes, yeah, but my version's right. Yeah, what's been your track record lately of being right? Is it possible that your perception has become sick in your memory just as you have over the years? I'll tell you something that was startling to me. In my first attempt to make amends to my sister, now we grew up in the same household with the same parents, same everything. And we started talking about our childhood. and she's flipping me out because she's saying stuff. That's not the way it happened. But what I do is I don't even realize that I tweak memories slowly to make them more wrong and me more right. Slowly, tiny tweaks, just tiny little unnoticeable stuff. But you do that for a decade or two, and all of a sudden your memory is a little bit different than reality. And then the book says, are you prepared to look at it from their point of view, from an entirely different angle? And it goes on to say an implication here. It says, we began to see that the world and its people really dominated us. In that state, the wrongdoings of others, first two columns, fancied or real, had the power to actually kill. I could take you to prisons in this country and show you people that are doing life imprisonment or long prison terms based on they killed someone and it wasn't even they had wrong information. They just imagined that guy did that to them, right? And you can't take it back. You can't take it back. Is it possible that some of this stuff could be fancied? Is it possible that I could be wrong about some of these things, some of these memories? I'll tell you something happened to me when I was early in sobriety. There was a guy, Billy Taylor, and Billy was an old-timer who used to like to go out to coffee after meetings with members of AA. And one night, I found myself alone with him in a coffee shop, and because he was an easy guy to talk to, I opened up and I told Billy some things about myself that I never told anybody. I eventually told my sponsor in a fifth step, but this was take to the grave kind of stuff. You know, we all got that secret, really, really ashamed of, we want to sweep it under the rug and never see the light of day kind of stuff. And I told Billy my stuff, and he seemed to take it okay. It would have helped if he would have said me too, but he didn't say that. What he said sounded a little bit like the AA party line, like I'm sure you're not the only one that's ever done that, and that maybe that'll help somebody someday. But he didn't reject me, and I went home that night, and I had my shift changed at work, and I was working the swing shift instead of the day shift, and I went for a period of many, many months, close to a year, I guess, of not seeing Billy. On my night off one night, I was working 6 days a week. On my night off, I went to a meeting I normally wouldn't go to, and Billy's in the meeting. I was delighted to see him, as you are with someone who's been an important part of your sobriety that you haven't seen for quite a while. And I saw him, and I said, "Hey, Billy, how you doing?" And he looked at me with this pained look on his face and just turned away. Just turned away. And the meeting started, and I sat there, and I don't even know what's going on in the meeting because I'm thinking about what he just did. Right? And I know what he just did. I know that SOB is he's been judging me for that crap I told him. I knew I shouldn't have never told him that. He's been judging me for that stuff. And there's a part of me, I'll tell you, that doesn't blame him. God knows I've judged myself harshly enough for that stuff. And I've always secretly believed if you knew about me, what I know about me, you're going to feel about me the way I feel about me. And that's not good. And I knew he was judging me. I knew all that AA stuff was a bunch of pap. And he was judging me, putting me down for that crap and criticizing me. And then I had this epiphany. I thought, oh my God, it's more than that. The reason that guy can't even look me in the eye, oh my God, he's been telling everybody that stuff. And it became so clear because I had just asked a girl out to coffee who was friends with him and she wouldn't go. I knew he told her that sleazy, disgusting stuff about me. And there was another guy who was friends with him and he was a little distant now that I thought about it. And that guy and I'll tell you, I am so infuriated now. By the end of the meeting, I'm just going to attack this guy. I'm going to straighten him out. And I feel justified because this is not just about me. He's probably doing this with other new guys. He's ruining Alcoholics Anonymous. They're going to build a statue of me for beating him up, I'll tell you. And I'm cocked and ready, man. I'm in fear. I can't think of nothing except how I'm going to tear into this guy and the meeting's over. And the chairman of the meeting said, before we close, does anybody have a burning desire? And Billy raised his hand and he tells everybody in the room, that they got the biopsy back and that the tumor was stage 4 and malignant, and he had a very short time to live. And I was like coming out of a daydream, a fog. I heard that, and I just wanted to sink down in my chair. I thought, oh my God. And then all of a sudden, it was like the veil lifted, and I saw the look in his face when he turned away. It was not a look of pain because he was pained over me. It was a look of pain that he'd been carrying that whole day on the day he found out he was going to die. And the day he found out he was going to die, he was probably so afraid, as I would be, so much up into his head, he didn't even see me. And I realized that Billy had never done anything, never gossiped about me, he never judged me. He'd only ever done was try to help me. And I was getting ready to attack him on the lowest day of his life. When it said the wrongdoings of others, fancied or real, had the power to kill, I shudder to think what would have happened to me if I would have attacked a man that did nothing but love and help me on the worst day of his life and then found out later what I did. I'm telling you, I'd never been able to come back into AA where he was so loved. I would have had to go out there and drink myself to death over nothing. Over nothing. Over nothing. I would have lost my life. And that was a great moment for me, because if that's true for Billy, could it be true for my parents? Could it be true for my sister? Could it be true from some of my exes, some of the bosses I had that I built such harsh cases against? Could some of that be fancied? Could I be wrong about them just as I was wrong about Billy? Is it possible? And I think the beginning of humility is to know that you don't know. And so the book says, what do? It says, well, these things are poison. We can't wish them away any more than alcohol. And then it says, this was our course. And this is where the change and the shift, and this was the part that if you can, in your innermost self, make the realization it's going to talk about, you will never, ever be the same again. You will know a freedom that's beyond anything you've ever known. And here's the realization. And this is easily placated, but it's hard to do inside ourselves. It's funny how the book sets this up. It gives you two things you got to realize. And the first one, the ego will jump on board for. It likes the first one. And here's the first one that the ego will kind of go for. It says, we realize, and this is innermost self, we realize that the person who had wronged us was perhaps spiritually sick. Yeah, they're sick. Stupid, too, and sick. Where's Dr. Kevorkian now that we need him? Let's put them out of their misery. They're sick. The ego likes that because it can feel smugly superior. It loves that. Sick. They're sick. I get it. You're sick. But now it's got you to concede that the person is sick, spiritually sick. Okay. Now here's where it messes with you. It says, though we did not like their symptoms. What symptoms? What are they talking about? Symptoms? Column number 2. If they had been spiritually fit and right with themselves and right with God, would they have done what they did in column number 2? I think not. I had a long 8-step list. I'm telling you, I hurt a lot of people. Honest to God, there was not one person on that list I hurt intentionally, yet I hurt them just the same. Driven by self, I hurt them just the same. Because I'm so vacant and selfish and needy and fearful and angry. I stepped on the toes of a lot of people. I never intended to hurt any of them. So column number 2, it says, even though we did not like their symptoms, the little bullet points, and the way these symptoms disturbed me, column number 3, self-esteem, pride, pocketbook, ambitions, that even though I didn't like the symptoms and the way these symptoms disturbed me, and then here's the realization. Separating the person from what they did, from the symptoms of their illness, I have to realize how they, like myself, were sick too. Now, this is not the position of a well person looking down on a pathetic sick person. This is the position of a sick guy who's often driven by selfishness and fear and anger, who's spiritually sick, looking right across the table at another person who's also victimized by those same things and driven by the same things, until you can see yourself in the person you've judged so harshly. A great example of that was the movie Bucket List. There was a scene, if you ever saw that movie, it's a great movie. There's a scene in there where Morgan Freeman and Jack Nicholson have been diagnosed terminally ill with cancer. They're roommates in a cancer ward, and they're both being given a brutal regimen of chemotherapy. And it is brutal. I've been through that with my mother, with some dear friends. It's a tough thing to go through. No, not my mother, my George. And it makes you really sick, and not just physically sick, irritable and kind of just difficult, depressed, angry, frustrated. It's a tough, tough deal. It makes you sick not only of body but of spirit. And there's a scene, and they staggered this chemo in these two roommates so that the one guy is in the worst grip of the results of the chemo one day, and the other guy's kind of over the worst because he's about to have another treatment soon. And there's a scene in there where the one guy is in the grip of the worst of it, and he's throwing up, and he's throwing things around, and he's acting like a jerk. And his roommate's not looking at him like he's an idiot. His roommate's looking at him with compassion and love and understanding, because he sees past the symptoms to the pain that's inside of him that's driving him, because it had been driving him just a few days before. In other words, he sees himself in that person. And this, for some of us, this realization is the beginning of the first experience that self-centered, self-obsessed, selfish people ever have with compassion. Compassion comes from two Latin words, cum, meaning with, and passio, pain. It's my ability to sit with your pain. In other words, I see past the outside stuff. I am awake enough to get you. I get you. Because you're me. You're me. Maybe you're me on a really bad day. Maybe you're me with a more abusive childhood. Maybe you're me with a little bit more pain, but you are me, because if I had going on inside of me what's been going on inside of you, I could easily have done to someone else what you did to me. As a matter of fact, I realized that in most cases I'd have been worse. In most cases, I realized that the people I judged were actually reacted to the things that were driving them with a lot more integrity and kindness than I would have, because I was an extreme selfish case. That I was treated with a lot more kind. There are bosses that gave me 2 and 3 chances, and I resented them when they finally fired me. I wouldn't have given a guy like me one more chance. There were people who continued to try to love me and help me in the face of my brutality emotionally to them and the terrible behavior. I wouldn't have hung in there. And yet I judged them so harshly when they pulled their love away. And the truth is, I couldn't have lasted half as long as they did in the face of my behavior. But when you're selfish and you're self-centered, you never see past yourself. And I could never see it from their eyes. And all of a sudden, it was like the veils were lifting, and I was starting to see it through their eyes. And oh my God, I never imagined I was like that. Because all I ever see when I look to see how I am is I see the stories I tell myself, the self-justifying stories, the blaming stories, the excuses, the rationalizations. I never saw myself truthfully. And then all of a sudden, everybody in the universe is on the same page about Bob. I get it. I get it. I get what I did to you. I get what it must have been like to be my mother and my father and my sister and my girlfriends and my bosses and the people who tried to be my friends. I see. Oh my God, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I get it. and I start to see where I'd been wrong. I can't imagine anything that's more ego deflating than to list all the things you're right about and then systematically every single case realize at depth, I was wrong. I was wrong. I was wrong. I was wrong. You can feel the ego reducing as it's dismantled section, brick by brick by brick, until you get to the bottom and you know you weren't even right about nothing. What about that? Well, okay, Bob, you were right about that. But a broken clock's right twice a day, for God's sakes. Ego hates this. It hates this. Some of us would rather be miserable and full of resentments than be wrong. But you'll never, if you insist on being right, I'm telling you, you'll never be free. There was a point in my life where I had so negative self-esteem and so high of an ego that I would rather be miserable and in danger of dying, yet being right about the people I had judgments about. I'm telling you, if you value being right above your own welfare, that gives you a hideous mental health quotient. And I was at a point, thank God, in my life where I wanted to be free more than I wanted to be right. There's nothing more important than freedom. There's nothing more important than my spiritual condition. Because if I don't, no matter how good you get it out here, if it ain't no good in here, it ain't no good. That's why guys in $10 million homes on the beach in Malibu with 15 years of sobriety put pistols to their head and blow their brains out. They have everything they could ever want externally, but inside it's the same garbage dump. Inside it's the same petty, childish, resentful, fear-filled, separate, alone. No matter how good you get it out here, if it ain't no good in here, it ain't no good. And so this is the beginning of freedom. And then the fifth thing, two more things, and I'll be real quick about this, is the prayer. And it's like all good prayers are not just words you say to God. They're words coupled with action. Everything good in AA involves action. And the action is, it says we ask God to help us to show them. That's action. I'm calling for action here, to demonstrate towards them, to present towards them, to show them the same tolerance, pity, and patience that I would cheerfully grant a sick friend. Now, if I have made the realization, and this was our course, this is a legitimate deal because now the veil's lifted. I see that these people, these were people I could have been very close to or maybe were close to at one time before I created the judgment against them, and a judgment against them based on things they could no more help being or doing than I could help doing and being when I was the worst I was. And I start to see myself in these people, and now I start to realize that asking God to help me to present myself to them with the same pity, patience, and tolerance that I would cheerfully grant a sick friend. I get it. I get why you're that way. I've been that way. I've been full of myself. I've been driven by fear. I've stepped on people's toes. I've done that. I've been that guy. Sober, I've been that guy. So I want to I'll start cutting you the slack that I always demanded others to cut for me. And then I say this prayer with each resentment, and I try to present myself to those people as such. And then the last thing, briefly, referring to our list again, putting out of our minds the wrongs others had done. This is not about, the questions that are here are very important, but it's not about looking for your part. Because matter of fact, the book says it's the opposite. This is not parts. If you're looking for your part, then you're unconsciously reserving the right to feel that they had a part. The book says, no. We put out of our minds the wrongs they had done. We disregard the other person involved entirely. Now knowing the truth about this person and how they were driven by what drove me in this relationship with this sick person. who couldn't help being the way they were, couldn't help being as angry as they were, couldn't help being as driven. In this relationship, where had I been selfish, dishonest, self-seeking, and frightened? And all of a sudden, for the first time in my life, I'm not hiding my behavior behind the shadow of what you did that was wrong. I'm standing up like an adult and taking the responsibility for my behavior, for my side of the street, for my mistakes. And I'm going to need to do every bit of that to go and face them and make amends, to clear up my side of the street. Sometimes amends is just forgiveness. Sometimes amends is, it's not about right or wrong, it's about mending separation. I've had to go make amends to people that really were pretty much all wrong. I didn't do that much, just a little tiny thing, nothing really. If there would have been any justice, they would have been the ones making the amends. The problem is they didn't have the tools and I did. So the burden of the action rests on the person that's awake enough to realize the need for the action. Right? It's not about right or wrong. You're going to wait for whoever owes the bigger amends to make the amends first. You're going to wait a long time with some people. Because some of us come from families that have been damaged by the family they came from. And they just don't have it. They won't ever have the tools to make it right. So the burden is put on us to change something that's passed down from generation to generation to generation. We are given the tools to change not only our lives, but the lives of others. Because it does do that. It's far-reaching. They say that every practicing alcoholic negatively impacts a minimum of 10 people. I think that's an awful low estimate of those of us that were very busy. I mean, I changed towns a lot. There was at least 10 people in each town. I mean, I impacted negatively a lot of people. But what about the member of Alcoholics Anonymous that buys the whole package and seeks out every person they can find, regardless of who's right or wrong, and tries to show up in a spirit of love and tolerance and kindness, and clears up their side of the street with a forgiving and loving attitude? How many people does that affect? And then their life is affected, and then they're kinder to the people around them. And maybe I've seen people make amends to people who the person was so shocked that they had an amends made to them that they realized people that they owed amends to and went out. It's like ripples in a pond. You never know how far-reaching this stuff's going to be. And so we do what we do. And we get what we get. It's good. Let's take a break. We'll come back at 2 o'clock.
So, step 4 part here, I'm going to talk about fear and sex. And fear of sex, as Bob said. And Bob said he's got his water bottle to douse himself in case I get too hot. And you know, Jerry told me he put this curtain up because I'm the first skirt to come up on the podium here. So I guess he had sex on his mind too. I'm glad I'm old now because sex used to move me around, I'll tell you. It was the driving force of my life. And you know, I still don't know much about it. I mean, I'm going to share with you what I don't know about it. I've been married 4 times, and a woman phoned up recently. I was going to be doing a weekend workshop for this group of women. And she said to me, Mary, could you talk on sex and intimacy? I said, well, I know absolutely everything there is to know about sex, and absolutely nothing about intimacy. Because in order to have intimacy in sex, you have to have one thing that has always been lacking, and that is called trust. And trust is a big issue for alcoholics. And I'll get a little bit into that soon. So first of all, I'm going to talk about fear. So on page 68, It says, we reviewed our fears thoroughly. We put them on paper, even though we had no resentment in connection with them. And that's what I have my sponsees do. I have them put their fears on a piece of paper, and we look at them. And a lot of the experience I have had with some of my sponsees is exactly like mine. You see, I did not think I had fears. I thought I was fearless, because I would not let anybody get one over me. I would not let anybody have this last word on me. I would chase you down to get the last word. I would stand up to you and be brazen. And I found out that that behavior is exactly what the psychiatrist told me about in the hospital. It was because I was fear-filled. I had low self-esteem. And it made me react in a manner that was aggressive, because I was filled with fear. And what was I afraid of? You know, when we list our fears, some of them are what? Death, life, people, the unknown, loss, change, life, work, everything. We deal with self-centered fear because we are filled with fear. And the fear is of the essential things that many of us felt before we even came in here. A lot of us, when we were very young, we always felt like we weren't enough. We always felt less than. We just felt as if we were inadequate people, that some piece had been missing out of us, and we were fear-filled from the beginning. And what is fear? It's false evidence appearing real. And where is that evidence, that false evidence, coming from? It's coming from the mind, our mind, which is not a stable place. And that is why we have sponsors. We have sponsors because they can get us into reality. We have sponsors so we can talk about the things that we are afraid of. Because I don't think the fear ever goes utterly and completely away. It will go away for a little while. We will certainly be able to handle situations that used to be fear-filled, but it remains within us. It says here, wasn't it because self-reliance failed us? You think if you're self-reliant, you won't be fearful. Two entirely different things. Self-reliance was as good as far as it went, but it didn't go far enough. Because the type of fear we live in is pathological. It is a pathological fear that makes our life unbearable and sometimes causes us not even to want to interact with people. You know, if my boss said to me, for example, how are you? I'd say, well, I'm afraid you're going to fire me. I'm afraid of not being able to do this work. I'm afraid that somehow I've got this job and I shouldn't really have it because I'm not adequate enough. And she wouldn't understand that. So I got to be able to take those fears. You know, if my only problem was alcohol, then I would not need to come here. I could stop drinking and everything would be beautiful. But the fact is that there is something wrong with me that is more than alcohol, and that is called alcoholism. And alcoholism is essentially an inability to live life on life's terms. How many people in here have been afraid of life? Yeah, get honest. So it's in order to have a less fear-filled existence, which is part of taking these steps are, and part of looking them on paper and finding out why. See, a lot of times our fears are not combined with resentments. That's why we need to look at them in a little bit different light. It says, if we have trust, if we begin to trust, but what are we going to trust? I cannot trust myself. That is where the fear lies. The same sick self that I have, that made me have panic attacks and everything else, is unable to create trust within me. Trust is something that I see normal people have naturally. I have to be given trust. Trust is like grace for me. Trust is something that is given to me when I put up the proper supplication and admit I don't have it. And you know, we have a lot of men in this program that they look as if they have it all together. We have a lot of women that look as if they have it all together. And you know, it's like, you know, when you see a duck going across a pond, it looks serene. And you look underneath the water and its little legs are going 1,000,000 miles a minute. You know, I can have fear to the extent that when I used to in early sobriety, I think if I go into the rooms and I say hello, somebody's going to ask me how I am. And then I'm going to have to tell them. And then I'm going to have to think about the next thing to say. And then I would create a whole dialogue for myself, and I haven't gone outside yet. It's like waking up in the morning in early sobriety. You wake up in the morning and you think, okay, I'm going to go out and carpe diem. You used to hear that a lot, carpe diem, seize the day. However, for me, I know if I go out, the day is going to seize me. And that is why I take all the sitting down and the contemplating, because who can I trust? God. And it says it here. Perhaps there's a better way. A better way than what? A better way than trusting myself. A better way in thinking that, okay, and finally admitting, I am fear-filled. What is the solution? What is the solution? We are now on a different basis. The basis of trusting God, trusting and relying upon God. We trust infinite God rather than our finite selves. Developing the relationship with God that we do when we're going through this and the fourth step is a wondrous thing, because we are able to put down actually what it is we have to know and have to rely on God. People think in the religious life, sometimes I try and speak to my family, and when I try and talk to them about some of the things I'd be fearful of, they say, just have faith and go out and God, you know, just go out there. If I tell them that I need a personal relationship with God to go out there, they don't understand that. They don't understand that I truly believe in my innermost self now that God is going to help me with my fears. That God is going to, and out of all the millions and billions of people in the world, God is going to be there for my... Now, whether or not that is true, although I believe it is, the very fact is that I am now beginning to believe that makes it true for me. And it makes it true for me to the extent that I get courage, because I had the wrong kind of courage. And I begin to go to, from being fear-based, self-based, me-based, to being God-based. And God's helping me here, because it's something I could not do alone. I was afraid of everything. Even today, and I will admit this to you freely, I do not like elevators. I do not like subways. So I don't go on subways. I do go on elevators. And it's not, over the last few years, it hasn't been as bad as it used to be, because I was claustrophobic. And the fears can make us claustrophobic. It can make our world very small. And it can prevent us from having interactions with other people. How does fear come into relationships? Well, it will come in because I don't trust you enough. So I'm immediately prejudging you before I even start to have a relationship with you. Can I trust you? And I get the fear that I won't be able to. We are in the world to play the role he assigns, just to the extent that we do as we think he would have us and humbly rely on him, does he enable us to match calamity with serenity. The world could be a calamitous place. But what I'm doing here is I'm relying on him. From step 3, where I've moved on to step 4, I am now turning my will and my life, all of my life, and all of my fears and everything that comes in the package that is me, all of my defects of character. I was taught, because I was so fear-filled, and also because having lived on the street, having been in mental institutions, I was not equipped to live life. Alcoholics Anonymous is not only the place that got me sober. Alcoholics Anonymous is the place that taught me slowly how to go into the world, because I couldn't do it. In the early days of my sobriety, the loving members of AA I couldn't even go into a mall. It was too big. And you can't walk with your back around a mall, because I always think there's somebody out to get me. So they would take me in and start walking me around where all these people were, and if I felt I couldn't handle it, they'd take me outside. That is what AA did for me. That is what the early members did for me. They encouraged me back into the world that had always been alien and fear-filled. Now, I've told you how aggressive I was. In the last days of my drinking, I was not a fun girl. I remember a bartender said something I didn't like, and he'd been making sandwiches with a carving knife, and I jumped over the counter to get the carving knife, and they sent for the police. Because I always felt as if, and also the other thing we have that makes us so fear-filled, and it talks about it in the beginning of the big book, is emotional immaturity and extreme sensitivity. And those all play into this. So you're going to take somebody like me, who from long before I drank felt less than, felt inadequate, felt as if I was on the outside looking in, felt as if everybody was looking at me and finding me wanting, to go into a very peaceful, wonderful, beautiful place where alcohol is working for me, and suddenly I don't have fears again, and suddenly I can go out into the world, and suddenly, the promises came true for me when I drank. I knew a new happiness and a new freedom. I didn't have a fear-filled life when drinking was working for me. But then when drinking is not working for me anymore, I have all those other fears, the paranoia of not drinking and all the fears that I had before I came in. So I'm going to match calamity. I was born on high alert. I was born expecting something to happen. I was always waiting for something to happen in the shoe, and I became an eye reader. I became an eye reader because I wanted to judge what you were thinking about me. And I went to a convent school, but let me tell you, the ladies in that convent school were a rough bunch. And you know what happens too, when you're a little different, you get bullied. And that's what happened to me. Because I was fear-filled, I got bullied. And in the end, because I was being bullied, I became a monster. So everybody would leave me alone. That was my way of coping with fear. I didn't have to talk to anybody anymore. I'll tell you something I don't think I've ever spoken about in Alcoholics Anonymous. When I was 15, because I was so crazy, I had a few friends, and I went to learn. They were deaf and dumb. They lived near me. And they took me to the deaf and dumb school. And I learned how to speak the deaf and dumb language on 2 hands. And I started hanging around with them. Because then I didn't have to communicate with people. Because when people see you doing the sign language, they leave you alone. That was the degree of fear that I felt. So where am I going to go from this a state that eventually would become dependent on drugs, prescription drugs, to cope with the world, and then dependent on alcohol to cope with the world? Where am I going to go for dependence? It says it here. Dealing with fears. We never apologize to anyone for depending upon our Creator. We can laugh at those who think spirituality is the way of weakness. Paradoxically, it is the way of strength. All men of faith have courage. That was the ingredient I was missing, and it goes right back in the line to where we said that seeming inability to accept much on faith. If I am self-reliant and I am a damaged self, then I'm a wreck. That self-reliance has failed me time after time. I used to look at people who were interacting with others and think, my God, I wish I could be like that. Why can't I be like that? Because being so encased in self, I was fear-filled. We never apologize for God. Instead, we let Him demonstrate through us what He can do. I will tell you that it is the God of my understanding that has reduced my fears from being just a walking fear to being somebody now. I mean, I am amazed at my life. You see, the depth of your gratitude, I think, is the depth you're coming from. Sometimes I'm walking through airports and I want to say to people, hey, I'm in airports, big airports, and I'm free. Do you hear what I'm saying to you? And sometimes I like my little soapbox and have them gather around and just listen to how I let go of fear. Because fear, I'm telling you, the blessings of this program for people like me are beyond measure. You know, you've heard it before. Bill Wilson wrote this book and he didn't know enough to write it. This is a divinely inspired book. And Bill Wilson was fear-filled and Dr. Bob was fear-filled. And they talk about them honestly and openly to us. It goes on here to say, we let Him demonstrate through us what He can do. That's what I've just done. I have demonstrated the power of God in my life in overcoming a fear-filled being to be able to do the things. Do you think I could ever stand up and talk in front of a crowd? Never. Each one of us is a demonstration of what God can do for us. Because if there's anything that could be defined as alcoholism, it is fear of life. Because alcoholism is escape from life. And some of us are sicker than others, and some don't have the degree of it that I had. We ask Him to remove our fear and direct our attention to what He would have us be. And that's what I do. I have everybody put their fears on paper. We have a look at them. We laugh over them. And then we burn the paper. We burn the paper when we do this. We ask Him to remove our fear and direct our attention to what He would have us be. And when I have those girls come back a year later and put down their fears for me, those who have been working the program, this is an amazing thing. Those who have been working the program, their fears have diminished. Those who haven't, their fears have increased. Because they're one more year more sober in the world and they're fear-filled. And they haven't developed a relationship with the God of their understanding. They haven't truly did a third step. I would say to you, if there is anything that can give us this transformation, it is a proper working of step 3. So now about sex. Most of us needed an overhaul in there. No kidding. Why is that? Why is it we're so afraid to talk about sex? Everybody does it. We wouldn't be here if it wasn't for it. It's related to fear as well. So we have to be sensible on the question. And it talks about human experience that, it's absurd extremes sometimes. One set of voices cry that sex is a lust of our lower nature. That comes from shame. A lot of people are very shameful about sex, especially Catholics. A base necessity of procreation. That's like, there used to be a thing when I was growing up in the UK, when women weren't supposed to enjoy sex. They used to tell you when you get married and go to bed with your husband for the first time, you just close your eyes and think of the Queen. And the duty she gives to her country. This is the duty I give to you. The other thing about sex, why is it so many alcoholics are promiscuous? A lot of alcoholics get promiscuous at a very young age. Why is that? I think it's all tied down to self-esteem, low self-esteem. And it's also fear of not being liked or being loved. And you think you're not enough just to be with a person, so you will go and sleep with everybody that you go out with. And you do that because you think that is the ultimate way, and what you realize is you're only damaging yourself more and more and more. You see, in order to have good self-esteem, you will delay sex. But because we are fear-filled people, we think that the only way we can keep somebody is if we have sex. I remember the first time I heard from a sponsor, go out with him for 3 months before you have sex. What? 3 months? He'll be gone. She says, well, he might be, but it wasn't worth having in the first place. I was 2 years sober. The old-timers told me that they usually say in Alcoholics Anonymous, no relationships for a year, but for you it's 2. Because you have the propensity for getting married. And I will tell you this, for the first year and a half or so, I didn't have it. Sex was gone from me. I don't know if you found that happens to you when you first get sober, but you just think that you'll never have sex again. It's sort of gone. At least you'll never have sex with somebody else ever again. So what happened, by the way, in order to have a healthy sex life, there has to be another person involved. So what happened was, at 2 years sober, I'm beginning to wake up. My libido's coming to life. And I think it's about time. And I go out and I finally look at this guy and I fall in love. Him and I, our eyes meet. And you get back that wonderful feeling, that ding-a-ling-a-ling, that kind of a passionate look. You're for me and I'm for you, And this is deep. This is deep. And you begin to get anticipatory sex, where you get very nervous when you see them, because this is going to culminate in something wonderful. So what happened was, here's what happens when you fall. Because my sponsor told me afterwards that it was not love I was in, it was lust. It was the 2-year lust of this recovering alcoholic that I mistook for love. Because she said, you don't know the difference. But I didn't know that then. All I knew was I was getting all these feelings that I'd never had or I couldn't remember having. because I'm healthier than I've ever been in my life, and I'm 42 years old. Because I certainly wasn't healthy before I drank. And when I was drinking, but I guess now I'm sober, I'm working a spiritual program, and I'm beginning to feel healthy sexually. So here's what happens. You have to have done the 12 steps to the extent that you're emotionally healthy enough. You know when it says in the big book, when 12 and 12, when boy meets girl on AA campus? I love that. But underneath it says they should both examine themselves to make sure there is no psychological problem going on. But I don't like that part. So here's what happens. You go into the rooms of AA and you fall in love in the rooms of AA and you have on your peacock feathers and you strut your stuff. And somebody asks you to read how it works and your eyes flit across a crowded room. And you just know that him and you are going to walk off into the sunset under the circle and the triangle. The circle and the triangle up in the sky with Bill and Bob behind saying, "Bless you, my child." This is made in heaven, this relationship. But what happens is, sometimes either you get married, like we did, or you have intimacy. And in those close quarters, one by one, the peacock feathers start dropping off. And all you have is the same two old turkeys with all the sexual hanging-ups sitting around. I shared that vision with my sponsor about walking with him hand in hand for the rest of eternity under the circle and the triangle. In a loving relationship made in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous, that I needed the spiritual gratification of having my sponsor say it was okay. And she said to me, "Don't get married, you're an emotional retard." And I knew she was jealous. And when we started having problems, she explained to me that I was not ready yet. That I wasn't able to she said, "Here's what happens with you." She said, and I'm going to be very honest with you, because I've had one other person like you that I've sponsored. She said, "You are one of those people that the minute sex enters the picture, you change. You become almost psychotic. And because you don't trust, and what you've done is you've revealed yourself in all your nakedness to another human being, and you've exposed yourself, and you know that they can get you, and you know that they have intimate relationship with you and intimate knowledge of you, and you don't trust them anymore. And you're going to hunt them down to see where they're going." And that's exactly what was happening to me. I wanted to follow my husband around to see where he was going, because I had opened up my life to him. You know, it's bringing the candle light into the darkness of the sexual relationships that we used to have. A lot of us had sexual relationships indiscriminately. And it was okay to have one-night stands because we were not living a spiritual life. We don't think about the damage to ourselves. Having sex in the dark, that's what I call it. Having sex in the dark with no light in there and no spirituality in there. And it is very destructive to people. And, you know, page 69. It says in 69, what do we do about them? All these sex problems, you know, and it says at the top of page 96, don't be discouraged. If your prospect does not respond at once, search out another alcoholic and try again. You are sure to find someone, somewhere. So in 69, it said, what can we do about them? Well, we reviewed our conduct over the years past. Where had we been selfish, dishonest, or inconsiderate? That's very important. Because a lot of times we don't even realize we are being selfish, dishonest, and inconsiderate. How can we be selfish in sex? A sexual act is supposed to be the giving of yourself. What can happen? Suppose you make overtures. Suppose you're in a relationship and you've just known the person a little bit, and you've been at the kissing stage, and then you make overtures and you are rebuffed. You are rejected. They say, whoa, wait a minute. What happens there? We can become retaliatory because there's no resentment like a sexual resentment. And we can want to hurt them. And sometimes I have seen the way that people hurt the people who initially rebuffed them is that they will plan and scheme to get that person into their bed and then walk away. And hurt that person immeasurably. The other selfishness, as you know, can be just not caring about the other person. It's supposed to be, a sexual act is composed with two people. Think of the times I've done it. You know, I did a stupid thing once. When I was still drinking, you know, money, power, sex is what moves the world around. And when I was still drinking and still looked reasonably okay, well, I thought that power was a size 6 jeans and 6-inch stilettos. That was my idea of power, getting power over you. And when you're young and good-looking and the drinking hasn't gone too far yet, you can manipulate men with sex. And I remember when I was drinking, before the end of it, I needed some money. And what happened was I was going somewhere and my good friend's husband was going to be there. And he was a millionaire. And I knew he'd always liked me. And we had a few drinks and we ended up in bed and I walked away with the money I needed. I betrayed my friend. I betrayed him. And don't do what I did in situations like that. I came in here and wanted to fix things right where everybody at first came to mind. I called that poor guy. I said, you know something, I want to tell you this. If I hadn't been drinking, I wouldn't have gone to bed with you. That's not what I meant. I meant I wouldn't have used you like that. But he hung up the phone. It's so important when we're going on from here and fixing all these things that we take instruction from people who've been there and from the book so that we don't do more damage. Another thing I've seen in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous, unfortunately, you know, I was telling you about that old woman last night who said, I never went to bed with an ugly man, but I sure woke up with a few. She said, but I don't do it anymore because I am a lady in Alcoholics Anonymous. A lot of times what happens here is, because we have younger people, they will get into sexual relationships, and they'll get into a few sexual relationships with people in the rooms. And then eventually they'll come into a room and maybe there's a man or woman will come in and there's a few people in there they've had sex with. And they don't want to come to the meetings anymore because they start to feel ashamed. We cannot live sober the way we live drunk. The other thing about the difference, the other fear of sex that I have found, when we are drinking and having sex, we're not present. We think we are, but we're not. The alcohol has created a bravado that we don't have. And it's made us be fearless. You notice that a lot of people, when they get sober, they're afraid to have sex because they're afraid They just don't want to, they're afraid that they won't be able to have it. They have some and want more, or they have some and don't want it anymore because they feel so uncomfortable for a while. I don't want to tell you that you got to keep trying till you get it right. I'm just saying that if you do the work, you'll be prepared to have a good sexual relationships. Have we been dishonest? I don't know about you, but when I was married, I had affairs. I had affairs. Now, it doesn't matter what he was doing. I used to say, if my husband has affairs, I will too, and then I'll leave him. That's not a spiritual way to live. And every time that husband and I were together, I realized I was in deep betrayal. And not only did it hurt him, it hurt my children. It talks in here about the sex powers. These things are very, very strong. You will see very, very powerful men being brought down by sex. Because they cannot resist the skirt. And they will lose their jobs, they will lose their homes, they will lose their wives for just chasing after that thing. So we try to shape a sane and sound ideal for our future sex life. We subjected each relation to the test. Was it selfish or not? We remember always that our sex powers were God-given and therefore good. You have to get through the place where the old way of thinking, when you had used sex to get what you wanted, used sex to manipulate, withheld sex to manipulate, where you had used it as a tool for something that wasn't good. You have to elevate it along with your spiritual life to the good. You have to think of sex in a spiritual context. You have to bring God into your life, every part of your life. And I know you think, well, I don't want God in the room when I'm having sex. But that's not what I'm talking about. I'm just talking about having God direct you in your sexual relations. Because nothing can make us go back drinking sooner. Nothing can make us meaner. Nothing can make us suffer losses and humiliations. All the resentments, all the trouble we've caused people, we can do that in sobriety with sex. Down at the bottom of 69, it says, God alone can judge our sex situation. God alone. I can't judge anybody's sex situation. Like, as Clancy said, so you used to live with a sheep outside Montana, Butte, Montana. Like I said the other night, there's only so many things you can do with your body. When someone gives me the sex inventory, I forget it. I don't remember. Because I've never heard anything new. There's nothing new. It's all been done. I know that sounds strange, but it does. It's all been done. And it says, suppose we fall short of the chosen ideal, because we are not perfect. And sex is a very strong, driving force. If we fall short of the chosen ideal, does this mean we're going to get drunk? Some people do. It depends on us and our motives. If we are truly sorry for what we have done and have an honest desire to let God take us to better things, we believe we will be forgiven and have learned our lesson. There's a solution for everything here. And I'm not going to read it out, but it's got in here to sum up about sex. It's about thinking of other person's needs, not just concentrating on self-centered sex. That's what a healthy sex relationship is all about. It doesn't mean also, and I want to finish with this, there's people in this fellowship who are single people. And they've had several relationships with different people, and they've done it well. They've had several sexual relationships with people, and nobody has ended up getting hurt because there has been a great honesty and forthcomingness and generosity between them. So it is possible, too, that I'm not, you can come in here and you can have sexual relationships. I'm not saying to have them arbitrarily, but you're human. If you're not married, it's going to happen.